We're going to start a Sichah now, printed in Chelik Tazayin, the third Sichah, a fascinating Sichah which, as children learning in Cheder, you think that Moshe was one age, and after learning the Sichah you'll see the Rebbe's revolutionary novelty of how old was Moshe when he left his house, when Bas Parai took him back. Let's begin. In order to properly understand the questions, let's very quickly go over Parak Beis in Shemos. In the beginning, we learn how Moshe's father, his parents get remarried again, and after 3 months, after a few months, Moshe is born, and the pasuk says, "Vatara isha vatelet bein," that she had a child, and she saw that the child kitoivu, the child was good, and vatitzpeneu shleishi yirachim, she hid him for 3 months. Pasuk Gimel says she couldn't hide him anymore, and she placed him in a basket, a reed basket, which was smeared with clay and pitch, and she placed the child in this basket. Then Moshe's sister stood from afar to know what will happen. Pasuk Hey says that Bas Parai came to Likkutei Sichos Volume, and she saw the basket, and she stretched out her hand to take the basket. Pasuk Vav then says she opened the basket, she saw that the child was crying, she had Rachmanis on it, and she said, "Miyaldi ha'ivrim zeh," this child is from the Hebrews. Pasuk Zayin says that Moshe's sister said to Parai's daughter, "Shall I go call a wet nurse from the Yidden?" And she said, "Yes, go and call, and I'm going to pay for the wages." Then at the end of the Aliyah, the pasuk says in pasuk Yud, "Vayigdal hayeled," the child grew up. "Vativi'eu lebas Parai," she brought him to Parai. "Vayiyeh lo leven," and Moshe was like a child, like a son for Bas Parai. "Vatikra shmei Moshe," she called him Moshe. "Vatemer," and she said, "Ki min hamayim mishisiu," I drew him from the water. Then in pasuk Yud Aleph, the pasuk says, "Vayi bayom mahim," and it came to pass in those days, "Vayigdal Moshe," Moshe grew up, "Vayetze el achiv," and he went out to his brothers, "Vayar b'sivloisam," and he saw their burdens, "Vayar ish mitzri," and he saw an Egyptian man striking, "Maki ish ivri," he saw an Egyptian man striking a Yid. So these are the psukim that the Rebbe is going to be focusing on. Let's begin. Aleph. From pasuk Vayi bayom mahim vayigdal Moshe vayetze vayaches hamitzri, which we just learned in pasuk Yud Aleph. It was in those days that Moshe grew up and he went out and he saw that a Mitzri was hitting a Yid. So Rashi matik the verter. Rashi quotes the words Vayigdal Moshe, and he says on his mefarish, he explains, we just learned in pasuk Yud, the pasuk says that the child grew up. So l'chayra, why would the pasuk again in Yud Aleph, why would the pasuk again say that Moshe grew? We already knew that he grew up. So Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eloi says, Harishain l'koima. The first time in pasuk Yud, when it says that he grew up, this refers to he grew up in height. V'hasheni, and the second one is l'gdula, the second one is in rank. Shimineu Parai al Beisai, that Moshe was appointed over Parai's household. So our pasuk and pasuk Yud Aleph is speaking about that he grew in rank, and pasuk Yud is referring to that he grew in physical height. Learning the Pashtus is by Rashi kosher. If you learn Rashi simply, Rashi has difficulty. What's the difficulty? The Zelba Kasha v'im Medrash. The same question the Medrash asks. It says that in pasuk Yud that Moshe grew up. So why in the next pasuk would it say again that Moshe grew up? If that meant for Rashi, so Rashi answers that the first one is that he grew up in height, and the second is that he grew in stature, in rank. So the Rebbe asks, this explanation is not understood. The Friedrich Apostel vayigdal hayeled v'gomer steht bald ubehemshech noch die Wörter vatika ha'isha hayeled vatenikeu. If you look in Pasuk Tes, which we read before, the Pasuk says that the woman, that the woman took this child and she nursed him. Was der Fundes verstanden über Pashtus, it's understood, as dort hat sich wegen bei Yigdal beerdigt mit Mann von Vatanikeo. So if we're saying that the child grew up after he was nursed, that means bepashtus bis chofte dalad chedesh, that he grew up, he doesn't need to be nursed anymore. A child after 24 months usually does not need to be nursed anymore. As the noch is vayigdal hayeled. So what happened? The child grew up, doesn't need to be nursed anymore because he grew up. So she couldn't hide Moshe anymore after 24 months. She couldn't use any more excuses that this child needs a Yiddish woman to nurse him. So after 24 months, she gave him back to Bas Pari. Aber vayigdal Moshe in dem Pasuk that wegen Agidel was bringt zu a Möglichkeit von Vayachas Mitzri. However, in Pasuk at Aleph, the Pasuk is speaking about how Moshe grew in a way that he has the strength to now Vayachas Mitzri to strike the Egyptian. Afil später dikes man, afil noch dem, wir hat sich schon gefunden, lying at its side by Bas Pari, much later time than he was by Bas Pari. Heint, was is das Schwert im Kefu von Vayigdal? What's the whole question? Rashi is asking, why does it say Vayigdal in Pasuk Yud, and why does it say Vayigdal again in Pasuk Yud Aleph? And therefore Rashi has to say, well, the first one is L'koima, the second is L'gdula, just say Bepashtus. Read the sequence of the Psukim. The sequence is that once he finished nursing, Moshe had to be brought back to Bas Pari. And the second pasuk, Yud Aleph, when it says that Moshe Rabbeinu grew, Vayachas Mitzri, means that he grew in a way that he's old enough to strike the Mitzri. So what's the whole question of Rashi? In the Pirish Rashi Gufa Darfim Verstehen. Now in Rashi itself, the Rebbe is going to ask a series of questions we have to understand. Aleph. The derech von Rashi Pirish is begret viel mal nicht zu eis teitschen frier die Schwierigkeit in den Pasuk und noch verentfern. Rashi's mythology, Rashi's way of how he explains or is Pshutish al-Mikra, he doesn't usually ask a question, he'll usually go straight to the answer. And using your head, you know that there's a question. No, as Bald Mevardim Pasuk, he explains right away the answer, and with that answer you know what the question was. Why does Rashi start off the question, why does our pasuk say again Vayigdal Moshe if the pasuk you'd already said it? Base. How is the terminology of the first one is l'koima for height? Von dem Zman wird ein Kind wird nigmal von Jenika kommt ihm zu in der Hispatchus von seiner Chitzenis te gewonnen. When a child finishes weaning, when a child finishes nursing, there are exterior features that the child develops. Es kommt zu vog, und mas, he develops in weight, and in es entwickelt sich sein Chush HaDiber, he starts to develop his speech, haseichel, his intellect, was is that Adgosha from the alle Sachen areis bringen Gidul bekema? So why would Rashi go and explain that the first Gedula that we're referring to is that Moshe grew in height? Why not say that he grew in weight, he grew in speech, there's so many different developments that a child develops in that stage. So why would Rashi only use the Lashon of Koima? Gimel, Verwann is the Hechrich in Pshudish Mikra von der Pasik as the Gadlus Uchashivus Moshe is beistanden in them was Mineu Pari al Besi. How does Rashi know that the Gadlus that Moshe received was that he was appointed over he was in charge of Pari's household? If you read the pasuk, the full pasuk, it's mashma that Moshe's Gadlus had to do with his brethren, had to do with the Jews. So Yidin unvi the Medrash Zakt, and like the Medrash learns that. So how does Rashi know that the second Gedula refers to that he was appointed over Pari's household? Here in the pasuk, it's mashma that the Gedula has to do something with Moshe el Achiv. Question number 4, Vibaldi Tmiya from Rashi is Mitzadim Kefil from Vayigdal. If the question that Rashi is perplexed has to do with why it says Vayigdal twice, Rav says Armatik from Pasuk, if them vard Vayigdal Moshe. So why does he quote Vayigdal Moshe in his Dibur HaMaskal? He's not bothered why it says Moshe, he's bothered why it says Vayigdal twice. So just quote the word Vayigdal in your Dibur HaMaskal. Hey, Kimidubur Kambamim, we spoke about many times. But in Rashi dem Namen von Bala Maimer, kedei damit vereinfachen oder machen glatter kashe was werden es by a Talmud Memulach. Usually when Rashi brings the name of the person who said it is because a Talmud Memulach, a sharp student, Ben Chamish Nikra, will ask a question that Rashi, by stating the name of the Bala Memra, it will be answered. Darfim Pashtem, we have to understand. What are you gaining by adding that the person who said this vort of why it says Gedula twice, that the Rishon is the Koima and Echad the Gedula was Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Loi? What does this help the Ben Chamish Mikla? So we have 5 questions, just to go over very quickly. Question number 1 is, why does Rashi start off as a question? Question number 2 is, why does Rashi use the Lashon L'koima and not other Lashonis to express how the child grew? How does Rashi know that the Gedula in our pasuk is that he was a master in charge of Pari's household? Question number 4 is, why does Rashi quote Vayigdal Moshe and not just Vayigdal? Why does he have to quote Moshe's name? And what does he gain by Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Loi's name? Question Gimel. And you could say, as Rashi will da bewarnen, as der Vayigdal in unseren Pasuk meint nicht demselben Zug von Gidel. You could say that the Gidel in Pasuk Yud Aleph, in our Pasuk, Rashi is saying that it's not the same Gidel as in Pasuk Yud. In Zman, in time, as it is zugekommen nach Asach Yoren, that it happened that the second, you could think that the Pasuk Yud Aleph Gidel was many years later. While it is schwer zu sagen, as the pasuk soll sagen, Vayigdal stam, it's very difficult to say Vayigdal just randomly under mit meinen Aisafa von a gewisses Zman. It's difficult to say that the second Vayigdal means that it's the same Gidel as pasuk Yud, that he grew up in time, but not give us what year we're talking about. How many years later? Was he 20? Was he 30? What Gidel are we talking about? So Rashi, so B'Pashas, you could say, what Rashi means is that you should not think that the second Gidel means a Gidel in time, because otherwise the pasuk would have said so. Therefore, what Rashi means to say is that the Gidel means a Cheshivas. Now, what's the problem with that answer? It's not enough to say this is what Rashi means. Why? Why does Rashi come and ask? In Pasuk Yud, it already says Vayigdal Hayelad. B'shasar kum mefarz nitem kefil from Vayigdal. Based on this explanation, Rashi is not coming to explain why it says Vayigdal twice, nor der pshat from Vayigdal Moshe in unsere Pasuk. Rather, based on this explanation, he's teaching us what in our Pasuk Vayigdal means. Based, der bir oifen ersten Vayigdal Hayelad has das meint lekoime is ibrik. Seemingly, the explanation that Vayigdal in the first pasuk, in pasuk Yud, means that he grew in height, it's extra. Nor gedacht wahr sein dem uftu in zweiten Vayigdal Moshe von dem pasuk. All he had to explain is the accomplishment of Vayigdal Moshe in this pasuk. As das meint the gedula, that this means that he grew in stature. Shmineu Pari al Beiser, that Pari appointed him over his household. So based on this, why does Rashi B'chlal have to say B'halik Var Ksiv? Our question is not on Pasuk Yud. Our question, based on this, our explanation is on Pasuk Yud Aleph. Why does it say Vayigdal again? So all Rashi had to say is that over here the Gedula Sheminu Pari Al Beisik. Question number 3. As der zweite Vayigdal is Benegech Shivas V'Gadlus the Gedula wollten gekent verstehen Eich on Pirish Rashi. This to say that the second Gedula Vayigdal means that he grew in stature. I don't need Rashi to tell me this. By Yitzchak Avinu, we had also the term Vayigdal twice, and Vayigdal Hayelad Vayigomel. It says in Parshas Vayeda, Vayigdal Hayelad Vayigomel, Vayigdal ish, vayelech, holoch, v'godol, ad ki godol me'it. And then it says in Parshas Tildis also the Vayigdal. And what's the Ershta Vayigdal? In Parshas Vayeda Vayigdal means is as man that he grew in time. Biz as Vayigomel, der Zweite Vayigdal, Biz as Vayigomel. And the Zweite Vayigdal is his movement from Gadlus B'nechosim. And the second Gidol in Parshas Tildis means that he grew in wealth. Like the pasuk says, "Weiter, vayilei mikne tzayin and mikne boker v'avodah rabbo she'emrim." They used to say, "Zevel pardeisiv shel Yitzchak." The manure of Yitzchak is wealthier; it's greater in wealth. Like kaspe uzahavi shel Avimelech. Avimelech and Yitzchak were both very, very wealthy. Yitzchak was so wealthy that the Gemara describes. They used to say that the manure of Yitzchak is worth more in value than all the gold and silver that Avimelech has. So based on this, I already know this concept of one that when it says Gidol twice, one refers to actual Gidol that he grew up in time, and one Gidol means in stature. So based on this, Rashi did not have to even explain the double expression of Gidol. So now that I've explained this, the Bir B'cholzeh, what's the explanation? The pasuk zok vayihi, and this is the key of the Sichah. The Bir B'cholzeh, the pasuk zok vayihi bayamim hahem. It says in our pasuk that it was in those days. Vayigdal Moshe grew up. Sibal dashteit bald noch in pasuk. Vayigdal hayeled. Since in pasuk it says vayi bayamim hahem. Pasuk in Aleph says that it was in those days, and in which days? It's coming out Hemshech of Pasuk Yud. Meint as is Vayigdal Moshe is given by Yom Mahim from Freer. That means that this Vayigdal Moshe in our Pasuk, Moshe grew up in those. It was in those days, and Moshe grew up. Which days are we talking about? Obviously, the days that the previous Psukim spoke about. Non Tzuzman from Vayigdal Hayeled, close to the time of Pasuk Yud that Moshe grew up, Vativiela Bas Parai, and Yocheved brought him to Bas Parai, V'ilei Ben, and Moshe became a child, a son to Bas Parai. So l'chayra, if our pasuk is using Bayam Mahem, learn as the Piddush from Vayigdal Moshe is Gdula v'chashivas. So therefore, you can't learn. Just because of the problem of Bayam Mahem, you can't learn that the second Vayigdal Moshe means in chashivas. Vasat kein Orden zu sagen, as the Yom Mahem von Vayigdal Hayeled, noch die Tag von Simas Man Henika is Vayigdal Moshe. It doesn't make sense to say that Moshe Rabbeinu Vayigdal, that after 24 months Moshe Rabbeinu grew up and he was returned to Bas Pari. And then in Pasuk Yud Aleph it says that it was in those days. Which days are we referring to? The days that he became 2 years old. And then it says again that he grew in stature. How could a 2-year-old grow in stature? The Gedula, how could a 2-year-old at this age, even Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the greatest leader ever, he is 2 years old. So you're telling me at 2 years old, he grew and Pari appointed him to be a whole minister in his household? So that's what's bothering Rashi. From the words Bayam Mahem, I'm perplexed and I'm wondering why in the world would Moshe Rabbeinu be appointed as Al-Beis Pari at age 2? The Rebbe is Rashi Mefarish, therefore Rashi explains no. Harishan L'Koima, the first Gidol that we're referring to in Pasuk Yud, that means in height. V'Hasheni L'Gdula, and the second one, our Vayigdal, means in Gedula. What does that mean? The Irke Chiddush in them is nicht benegedem Vayigdal von unser Pasuk V'Hasheni L'Gdula. The Chiddush is not Pasuk Yud Aleph. Rashi is not coming to explain what Pasuk Yud Aleph is saying. Rashi is coming to explain what Pasuk Yud means. Nor as the Vayigdal von Friedik and Pasuk meint L'Koima. That means that Rashi is coming to explain that what does Vayigdal mean in Pasuk Yud? Not that we thought before that he's 2 years old, but rather L'Koima, that he grew in height. Vayigdal Hayeled may need them Gidol was noch in Zman Ha'nika. The Vayigdal Hayeled doesn't mean the time that he finished nursing, which would be 2 years old. Like it seems when you read the Psukim at first glance. Or L'Koima, what does L'Koima mean? It means when a child grows up and becomes tall. Moshe Rabbeinu was a very tall person. Was das is mit ameshach yoren nacht misman fun vayigamo. This is a lot later than when he's 2. Und das was wird noch als angerufen Yelad. So why are you calling him a Yelad if he's a child, even 11, 12, like we're going to see in a second? Why would you use Lashon Yelad? So the Rebbe says it's not a problem. As Reuven used the expression on Yosef, said Hayelad Einenu, called Yosef a child. Atachtu b'Yelad meinde Yosef was is dan alt given 17 Jahr. Yosef was 17 years old, yet the Torah refers to him as a child. So you could still, even a teenager, you could still call him a Yelad. V'bal does Harishan l'Kema. So since the first Vayigdal means that he grew up in height, is schon verstandig was besmiches zu dem Zman, wenn schön ausgewachsen bekomme, kann euch sein Vayigdal Moshe Gadlus b'chashivus v'ashen l'gdula. Now we could explain what the second Vayigdal means, that he grew in stature, makes a lot of sense. Because here, Moshe Rabbeinu, Bayom Mahim, is not referring to when Moshe was 2, but rather when Moshe was much older. So now that he's older, I can understand why and how that Parai appointed him a leader. Now we can understand why Rashi asks the question, the Chayra didn't already say Vayigdal HaYelad? From the Iger Chilish Pipirushi is, as Mitzad them was da steht Nachama Vayigdal Moshe. What's Rashi's novelty? Since it says over here again, Vayigdal Moshe, bites if they're tied from Vayigdal HaYelad in Friedrich Pasuk. So what Rashi is coming to tell me is that since in Pasuk Yud Aleph it says Vayigdal HaYelad again, it must be that Vayigdal in Pasuk Yud is a different Vayigdal than we thought. What Vayigdal do we think? Are we saying is the Vayigdal that not that he was 2 years old, but rather he was much older in age. So that's why Rashi asks the question V'halei Kvar, because the Chiddush is not in our Pasuk, but our Pasuk is coming to teach me what Pasuk Yud is that Vayigdal means in height. Hey. Seemingly you can ask. The only reason why Bas Pari gave the child Moshe Rabbeinu to Yocheved is because she needed a Jewish nurse. It's wie kommt es, was sie hat der Los, man soll ihm zurückbringen erst nachdem wie is ausgewachsen bekäme, was ist genau Meshach Jahren nach dem Zman Hinika. Now the Rebbe asks a very simple question, based on what I'm explaining, that Moshe Rabbeinu was a lot older than 2 years old. He was we're going to see either 5, 6, or 11 or 12. How could Bas Pare allow Moshe Rabbeinu to be there for such a long time? Why didn't she catch on that after 2 years, give me back the child? The whole purpose of why Moshe was there was in order to be weaned. So after he's weaned, give him back. So the Rebbe says, is the Hasbara Gorbe Pashtus. What's the explanation? The Baldi Mutter Yocheved, Hashem Bakumt Ir Yelad Moshe. Since Yocheved, the mother, already got Moshe, hat sie ihm nicht zurückgegeben zu Bas Pare Tekef nor nach dem Zman HaYinika. So she didn't give Moshe back right after she finished nursing him. Nor sie hat sich sicher imstande gewesen zu halten ihm bei sich was langer. She used every effort to keep Moshe by her as long as possible. Nach dem Zman HaYinika. Durch verschiedene Asbaras, wenn Imukim am Eskabim Alev, she used different explanations and different tricks to explain Bas Pare why Moshe needs to be by her. Eser Yelad is zu ihr zugeweint und zugebunden, is nicht gut, wir sollen abreißen und wegnehmen von ihr Kietzebazah. Yocheved told Bas Pare that it's not healthy for the child, since the child is naturally attached to me because I nursed him for the first 2 years of his life, so the child is naturally attached to me. It's not healthy for Moshe Rabbeinu to now be given back to you. So she used that excuse for many, many years. But once Moshe Rabbeinu became older in height, he's an adolescent, he's a child which doesn't really need the attachment of this woman. Hat sie nicht gehabt kein Breder gemusst abgeben zu Bas Pari. So he had no choice, she had no choice, she had to give him back to Bas Pari. So based on this explanation, it comes out a fascinating chiddush. We think that how long was Moshe Rabbeinu by his real mother for 2 years? Based on this explanation, it comes out that Moshe Rabbeinu was there for years and years. And once she had no choice, she couldn't use any more excuses why this child needs her anymore, she had to give him back to Bas Pari, but that was much later. And with that, we can understand how is it possible that by Yom Mahim, right afterwards, was Moshe Rabbeinu upgraded in rank that he became a whole macher on Pari's household. So the Rebbe asks, we have to understand. So if Bas Pari wanted Moshe Rabbeinu by hers, moving, it's understood. As Yechevet hat ihm gekannt verhalten, nur bis wann es kann sein gültig dem Tam va Masla now. So Yechevet can hold Moshe Rabbeinu as long as the excuse lasts. As fahren Yelad ist wichtig zu bleiben bei der Menekes v'chuli, sein dich stark zugebunden und koruch zu ihr. So Yechevet, it's a matter of time for this excuse that the child needs me will work. Was das ist bis in Gil von Ben Chomesh v'Sheish l'chol ha'yeser, b'shtadus yiseda bis zum Gil von Yud Aleph v'Beishana. This will work up to 5, 6 if you want to push it to 11 and 12. Und ebazei wie es shaykh zu sagen, as bald nachdem soll Moshe und as junge älter zukommen zu Gdula b'chashivas v'asheni l'Gdula. So based on this, we still have to understand, even if you want to say that Moshe was 12 years old, how is it possible that Moshe Rabbeinu by Yom Mahim becomes such a great samacher? Therefore, Rashi says, as the Gdula b'shteit in them was me knew al pari al basi. What was Moshe Rabbeinu's chashivas? What was the greatness of what he received? Was that he became in charge of the household of Pari. It says, Nidach shivas Gdula klolis in Pari. It's not a general rank in the army or a rank in his melucha. Nor amine prati oiv dinyone bias from Pari. He got a specific job. What was the job? That you're in charge of Pari's household. You're the caretaker. Was azag dula mina can sein oich bei azav was is noch sehr jung. You can have a child who's very mature, who's very capable at age 12 taking care of a house. If there is a special reason to give him the position. You find this by Yosef. As to 17, 18 Jahr is schon given a mamuna al beis Peitifar, that we see that Yosef, even though he was so young at 17 years old, he already became a whole great samacher, a whole big appointee. He became a person in charge of Peitifar, of beis Peitifar. So, how did Moshe attained this position? Doesn't mean that he became a big minister in his army or in his melucha. It was very specific. The second one is Sheminu al beis Pari. The Pari appointed Moshe Rabbeinu over his household to be in charge. Okay, Zayin. Was ist Tag der Tam was früher hat was Pari hat Mamana given Moshe al beis in Azai Yungugil. So fine. You want to explain to me why Moshe was capable to run the household, but why would Pari give Moshe this position at 12 years old? Rashi alludes to this by quoting the words like we asked. Why does Rashi quote the words Moshe? Why not only by Yigdal? It's because the word Moshe is telling me something very specific. Rashi is bavarning another question with the word Moshe. Is the word Moshe in Pasuk Ibrik? Seemingly the word Moshe is extra. Wenn sie wollt gestanden nur bei Yigdal, wollt man von Friedrich Pasik gewusst, als dort hat sich wegen Moshe. Even without saying the word Moshe, I still know that the Pasik is speaking about Moshe. So why use the word Moshe? Therefore you must say, as the time was der Pasik is da mefeiert der Namen Moshe is, weil die Adgoshe bei Sofa von der Namen, wenn das ist nicht mochach. If the Torah is adding the word, in our case, Moshe, even though it doesn't need to, it's showing on something which is very beloved and very dear. Especially the name Moshe Rabbeinu was the mont as Bas Pari min hamayim mishisiu. As we said in the beginning of this year, why was Moshe called Moshe? Because he was pulled out of the water. And we know that, like Rashi says, that when Baspari came to the Nar and she tried to reach the basket, her hand was stretched out. It was a big miracle. As das meint Vayigdal Moshe. So this is what the pasuk means by saying Vayigdal Moshe. Das is a gadlus was gekum mitzat chavivus. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu get this position? Is because he was very beloved. Beloved by who? So the Moshe's chavivus and the siaschen by Baspari. Since Moshe Rabbeinu found favor by Baspari, Be'ezaz Vahila Leben, Baspari treated Moshe mamash like a son. Has he gepoiled by Pari? So because she loved Moshe Rabbeinu so much, almost like a son. So therefore, she was able to affect Pari. She knew al-Beisei that Pari was appointed Moshe over his house. And that's why Rashi quotes the word Moshe to tell us that the only reason why he got the position is because he was Moshe. Because he was beloved by Baspari, that affected that her father gave Moshe the position. Now that is by Yosef, and the same thing we find by Yosef. As Val Erosh Nesa Chen given by Petifer and Hatar Yosef Mana given al-Beisei, and because Yosef found favor by Baspari, that's why he was given the position. The Tkokendik was Erez given on Nar Ivri Una Eved. And they looked over the fact that he was a Yiddish child, and he was a Nar Ivri, like Rashi says there, Barichas, what it means, and he was a slave. Ches. So in order to understand this even greater, Rashi wants to explain to you that sometimes you give a person a position because you just like the guy, and he finds a certain favor to you that you give him the position. So Rashi wants to dwell on this Indian even more. Especially if you want to say like Yosef. Yosef was at least 17. Yosef was akapanim al given 17 Jahr. Moshe was bepashas given it mervia ben yinalf and yud beis kanal. So even if you want to say it's like Yosef, that just like Yosef found favor, Moshe also found favor, but there's a big difference. Yosef was 17, 18. Moshe was, if you're lucky, 11, 12. So therefore Rashi quotes the words, like we asked before, why quote the Bala Memra? The fifth question is because Rashi is telling us there's something about Yehuda b'Rabbi Loi which will drive home the point of even when somebody is not on paper a royer for the position, but if he is liked by the person in charge, then he gets the position. And we're going to see a fascinating thing. So he says like this: in regards to Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi, the Gemara tells over, the Gemara in the Dorim, as it is given agreis ani, that Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi was very poor. Biz as in sein frui haben gehat nor ein beged. The Gemara says that him and his wife had one outer cloak, one garment. B'shas b'shim Gamliel geizer tainis given, hat Rabbi Yehuda my time and nitki kent kumen. And when Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel made decrees about a fast, and he wanted everyone to come together, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi could not leave his house because he didn't have a garment to go out with. He didn't have a beged to cloak himself with. So he was very, very poor. Nevertheless, we find the Gemara in Shabbos tells over, as der Kesar dim der Heben zu sein, the Reish Hamedabrim b'chol Mokim biz as Muraina de Benesiya Habe, says that the Kesar appointed Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi to be the Reish Hamedabrim, to be the head of the head speaker, and he was the head of the Benesiya. We know Kesar Reish al Beis Nasi. He was appointed to be the head of the spokesman for the Yidden. He was the headmaster of Beis Nasi. So the Choyda, he's a very poor man. He's not even presentable. Yet, he was appointed to be the Kesar. From the Kesar, he was appointed to be the Reish HaMedabrim. Warum? Hagamas Rabbi Yehuda is mitzad sein ois ehrlichen chetzenis teke matzav utnai chayav given in atzir was is nit massen far amine von Reish in the Eugen for the Malchus. The Choyda, that even though ostensibly he looked like a pauper, someone who's not presentable to be the representative of the Yidden, he was so poor that even in regards to other poor people, he was like a level poor. But since he found favor in the eyes of the Kesar, because he found favor in the eyes of the Kesar, he got this position. So just like Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eloi got this position, same thing in our topic. Moshe is noch given jung, anar, is over mitzad zayin ma'ila zayin de kazei chove by Baspari. But even though that Moshe was very young, but since he was beloved by Baspari, was im ariskum min hamayim, which she took him out of the water. On vayilo leben, he was like a child, a son to her. So he was able to get this very high position in Beis Pari, biz as minu pari al Beisi. So the reason, al pinigla, the reason why Rashi mentions Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eloi is because just like Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eloi got the position, even though al piseichel didn't make sense to give him the position, Rashi quotes this name to tell us that even though Moshe was very young, but he got the position. Why? Because he's Moshe. Because he found favor in the eyes of Baspari, who later affected Pare to give him this position. Fascinating beer al pinigla, which answers all the questions now. So now, his test, the Rebbe says, according to the secrets which refer to Chassidus, alle Inyanim, was man gefindt bei Moshe Rabbeinu, begashmi ist kommen und werden Stahlschuh von dieselben Inyanim, wie sie seinen everything Moshe Rabbeinu, anything you see in Torah, it's there because the source of it is Beruchnius. By Moshe Rabbeinu, especially Moshe Rabbeinu. Was is given the mata punkt the is given the mile. Moshe Rabbeinu was like the same person that Moshe Rabbeinu was down over here. His source was the same thing. What does that mean? An neshama d'Atzilus. Moshe Rabbeinu had a neshama from the level of Atzilus. Was azoi is oich moving minyanenu. So, in our concept, as in the tzvei inyoni gedula, harishon came of Hashem gedula, shminu pare al bese. This, that physically, Moshe Rabbeinu, the first pasuk is referring to that he became a gadol in height, and the second gedula means he became a gadol in chashivos. If we'll understand and study who Moshe Rabbeinu was spiritually, we'll understand what these two levels are, beruchnius. So he explains like this. But when das verstehen behekten, was auf dem Pasuk, when he gave this Moshe vatara isha vatel bein vatera isiki teivu. The Pasuk says, which we said before, Parak Beis, Pasuk Beis, says that Chever had she became pregnant, and she had a son, and she saw that the son, this Moshe, was ki teivu. She was good. It's interesting. I don't know how many people know, but Moshe had two names, the Gemara said, Moshe and Tuvia. So Yechevin named Moshe Tuvia, and Pare, like we said, Baspari named Moshe Rabbeinu, or Moshe. Yet Moshe, al Tzakaras HaTov, he kept Moshe, the name Moshe, even though his mother named him Tuvia. Okay, so some aside point. So what does it mean that she saw that he was good? So it says in Zohar, the Zohar says, between Reb Chia and Reb Yesi, what does it mean she saw it was good? Reb Chia says that she saw he was good means that he was born gemalit, he was born circumcised. Or Reb Yesi says no. Nihiru the shchinta the nord bechamas, the beshaita the sialid asmalya kol beisanahira, that she saw the shchina was residing over him, that when he was born, the house became full with the Shekhinah of Hashem. That the whole house became filled with Shekhinah. So, again, it's important to know this. Reb Chia says that Kitoivu means that he was born with a bris, and Reb Yesi holds that she saw Shekhinah reside over him and in the household. So, is Mavur in Erachama, the Sefer Erachama, which is an explanation on, the Zohar explains, as the Machlekes from Reb Chia and Reb Yesi is not in Metzias. The Machlekes between Reb Chia and Reb Yesi is not in Metzias. Are they arguing over a fact? What was good? Was it good that he was circumcised, or was the Kitoiv that there was Shechina there? So, the Erachama explains, Beita haltanas by Moshe and Gven Beita Nyanim. Both agree, side of Yesi And Sar Reb Chia agree that he had both milas. He was Nolad Mol and Yehida de Shchinta. The Machlekes is Nar, so what's the dispute between the two? Was hat Yecheved gezen madish given? What affected Yecheved? What wowed her? What wowed her was that he was circumcised, or what wowed her was the Shechina. Was halt Reb Chia at the Yalad Mol and Reb Yesi is Yehida de Shchinta and Yehida Bechams. So why is it that Reb Chia holds that what wowed her was that she was circumcised, he was circumcised, I'm sorry, and why is it that Rabbi Yossi holds that the Shechina was the thing that really got her excited? So the Reb Leivik explains, the Rebbe's father explains that he had explanations, ha'oros on Zohar, so he explains beautifully. Every single one of them explains this because that was their personality. What does that mean? Reb Chia was the level of Yisoid. In the 10 spheres, the second to last level is the level of Yisoid. Reb Chia, he personified the level of Yisoid. In esoteric levels, when you want to refer to the level of the bris, you call it the level of Yisoid. So Reb Chia, he personified Yisoid. So what spoke to him? His personality, he said it must have been the Yisoid. When Rabbi Yossi, B'chinas Malchus, however, Rabbi Yossi, he's the level of Malchus. He holds that what excited her, Malchus, Shechina usually refers to Malchus. So is the Malchus because he personified, his personality was a Malchus-tic personality. And Reb Chia, his personality was more of a Yisoid personality. So when it came to explaining, Reb Chia said, the Pashtus, it's the bris, the level of Yisoid, and Rabbi Yossi said it's the level of Malchus. There's Simein in Zohar, and what does the Zohar conclude? Is nit von Divrei Rabbi Yossi. Nor the stammer von Zohar Firteis as seine given by him beidin yonim. The Zohar concludes that he had both milas. He had the mila of a bris, and he had the mila of Shechina. Okay, Yud. The Asbara in Eishis Pshuta says, what's the explanation? It's in simple words. In regards to the Malos of Moshe, we find two things. First, Moshe, in regards to the completion of himself, Moshe Rabbeinu was the chosen, like the Rambam says, that Moshe Rabbeinu was the chosen from all men. He was higher than the world. His entire being, his entire essence was connected with Hashem. And Beis Hashlemus Al Tzureya, he was also the ultimate level of a shepherd. Was that he was able to bring down all the necessities, the physical and spiritual necessities to the Jews. And through the Yidden, eventually to the entire world. And this is, on one hand, you're saying that Moshe Rabbeinu was very high level, he was higher than the world. On the other hand, you're saying that Moshe Rabbeinu also was the ultimate shepherd. An ultimate shepherd means that he's giving from himself to help the Yidden and help the world, to sustain them in everything they need when it comes to the physical and comes to the spiritual. So you have two polar opposites. And not only that, Moshe Rabbeinu needs to descend from a level of high to go and actually fulfill his mission. When the beide suge milas and by him given betekov megilei tekov mishnilot. And these two advantages, that Moshe was betachlis hashlemus, yet he also was betachlis for other people, that you saw right when he was born. When the Medrash zokta from pasuk Moshe hayraya, like the Medrash says on the pasuk that Moshe was a shepherd, hayamatukon lakach. Even from a young age, he was born a shepherd. He was born a nasi. These are the two things. When you're saying that Moshe Rabbeinu was born circumcised, that means he had the ultimate level of perfection. He was higher than the actual world. When somebody is born circumcised, that shows that he's a very, very holy kid. As by him, by him he has the nefesh alikis, his godly soul is shined in a revealed way. There is under Helen from Yetzer Hara. He doesn't have the foreskin, which that refers to the Yetzer Hara. He doesn't have the blockage of the Yetzer Hara. Und das was nehida de Shchinta in Hara Bay, Chuli, Asmal Yokol Beis, and that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was born, the entire world, the entire house was filled with the Shekhinah, is the Maila Ushlemus von Zayin Hashpa Ba'aretz Eden, shows that he had the ultimate level of Hashpa, the ultimate level of giving over to other Jews. So Moshe Rabbeinu had both Mailas. He was the ultimate person, yet he also was the ultimate Rayei Neman. Therefore, when I look at the level of Yesod and the level of Atzilus, Hecher Fan Ivroim, that's Atzilus in general is higher than any creations. It says, so when I look at the level of Yesod, that's the ultimate level of a person's connection to Hashem. Because the level of Yesod of Atzilus is the way it's connected to Atzilus itself. Didn't really start the emanations yet. Because it's higher than the world. Therefore, Reb Chia says, therefore, that according to Reb Chia, the Maila of Moshe is the level of Yesod. The way that the Maila of Moshe, like the way the Torah brings out, is das was the Sial mold. What's the ultimate level to bring out Moshe Rabbeinu's quality is the fact that he was born Gemalit. Moshe's Maila Shleimus La'atzmi. If I look at the ultimate level of Moshe is the way he is by himself. So therefore he holds that since Moshe's main Maila is that he is the ultimate person connected to Hashem, so that's like the level of Yesod, which is still connected to Atzilus. So therefore he holds that the main thing is the bris, the level of Yesod. But when I look at Malchus, which the level of Malchus, of Atzilus, is the way that it comes down into the level of Bria Yitzira Asira. So when I look at this in Avodas Hashem, as the Iker Ma'aler Shleimus is Ashpa V'Rid Tzu Azilos. So the main Shleimus Avodah is not your own perfection, but rather when you're giving over to other people. When Rebbe therefore Rebbe says, P'chinas Malchus, that the main thing that really turned her on, got her excited was the level of Malchus. As the Maila from Moshe had sich angetan in them was Nehidu Shechinte Nehidu Bei Asmal Kol Beisa. That the main Maila of Moshe Rabbeinu was not his own perfection, but rather the way he affected other people. The idea of Shechina, which Nismal Habayis Kula Oida, which the whole house became filled because of him. But on the contrary, Shemvi, their Inyan is the Maila as the Kechein Seif. He says on the contrary, just like the mile of the level of Ein Seif, like we explained a few times, that the level of Atzmos has a connection, or Ein Seif has a connection dafka with Malchus, and it's dafka through the level of Malchus. That can have a connection with the level of Ein Seif, in that he salvos from Yesh V'Davar Nifred, from Elim Esbiyah, Nitin Svir Shal Ma'al Mimeno, so just like I see the Maila, that the main Maila of Ein Seif dafka when it's connected with the level of Malchus, the same thing down over here. As the Emes Maila Pshita Zok Sich Ois, dafka in the Yashpo and Amshochat Tzol Azulas. The main completion, the main Emes Maila of Moshe is when he is for other people. Was Begila is das verbunden mit der Yerida V'Ashpol and Zamadrega, even though externally it looks like it's a big Yerida. Yud Aleph. This is the last ice. And this is Rashi Menames, and this is what Rashi alludes to on Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. This is what Rashi says, that Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi says, Harishon l'koyma v'ashen l'gdula. Sheminu pare al beisei. Mitzad medreges Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi, der hert sich die Meile in die beiden Yonim. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi, since he was such a great person, he was able to appreciate both Meiles. Sai in the Megillah von Shleimus Atzmi, Sai in the Shleimus for himself, L'koyma, the Moshe Rabbeinu was the ultimate level of height. Signed them Inyan Hashpa al Azulas, the Gdula Sheminu Par al Beis, and also the way that Moshe Rabbeinu was a mashpia for other people. What does that mean? The beer and them b'pnimis and Yonah. What's the explanation? The chiluk between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eloi, and Rabbi Yossi is, what's the difference between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eloi, and Rabbi Yossi? Beide is in Yonim Madregas Mesfiras Malchus. Both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Eloi, Rabbi Eloi and Rabbi Yossi, both what talks to them, the level of Sfiras Malchus. Rabbi Yossi is b'gematria Elikim. Rabbi Yossi has the same gematria as Elikim. Hashem Elikim, gate of Malchus. The level of Elikim, between Elikim and Havaya, Elikim goes on the level of Malchus. Rabbi Yehuda's Meloshin Heido Bittel, and Rabbi Yehuda comes from the lashon of Haido, which is Bittel. Was das is Inyan in Sfiras HaMalchus, which that's also the level of Malchus, also the level of Haido and Bittel. So Rabbi Yossi has the gematria of Elikim, which that's Malchus, and Rabbi Yehuda is also Malchus, but he is the level of Malchus the way it is in a way of Bittel. So what's the difference between the two? Rabbi Yossi is Visfiras HaMalchus is Yeredas and Biyah. Rabbi Yossi is the level of Sfiras HaMalchus, but the way it goes into Biyah. Rabbi Yehuda is Visfiras HaMalchus is Noch Atzilus. And the way that Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Loi is the way of Sfiras HaMalchus, which is still in the level of Atzilus. Malchus has two things. On one hand, it's a Makabel. On one hand, it's a Mashpia. So Rabbi Yossi is focusing on the way that Malchus is a Mashpia to the levels of Bria, Yitzira, Asiyah. And Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Loi is focusing on the way that Malchus is still in the level of Atzilus. But the Chilik is Eich Merumas and Zeir Namen. This difference is also alluded to in their actual names. Rabbi Yossi is B'gematria Elikim. Rabbi Yossi is, like we said, B'gematria Elikim. What does that mean? Das Heis, that means. Number one, Aleph says Nar Shem Elikim. First of all, Rabbi Yossi only has the name of Elikim. Nit Shem Havaya. He doesn't have this level of Havaya. And Beis, in them Gufa, Nit Elikim Shtet Begili. And he doesn't have the way that Elikim is in a revealed way. Nor V'yeshteit in the Gematria Behelam Behester. He has Rabbi Yossi, what do we say? Rabbi Yossi is B'gematria Elikim, which means that Rabbi Yossi's level, first of all, he doesn't have Shem Havaya. And even in the Shem Elikim, he doesn't have the actual Elikim, he has the Gematria, which Rabbi Yossi, which that shows on the Helen Behester, even on the Elikim. Shengem Yehuda was in them, wird stehen the Oisius von Shem Havaya unbegolei. Rabbi Yehuda has the level of Havaya in his name, which means that the level of Yud Kei Vav Kei, Havaya shines to him in a revealed way. And with this, we can appreciate the difference between the two. But Rabbi Yossi, Malchus kommt up in Biyah. Rabbi Yossi is the way that Malchus comes in Biyah, Herzich on the Meile and Ashpa Melucha Elam. So by him, what does he appreciate? The way that the Melucha has to do with the nation. However, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Loi, Shem Havaya Begili, which we explains, this is the name of Havaya in a revealed way. Mitzad Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Loi, he has both Milas. The Darge von ein Seite in Malchus is Malchus verbunden im Yuchim Tziras Shalom Eilam Mimeno. On one hand, like we said, Malchus is connected to the spheres which is higher. As well, he also has the way that he becomes a source to the other worlds. The signal nacher says da der bittel in Sfiras HaMalchus. There's the bittel of Sfiras HaMalchus. Like a king has to be in the ultimate level of bittel. Like the Gemara says, that when a king bends down by Shemon Esrei, he's not allowed to get up. So he's the ultimate level of bittul. On the other hand, he's nasos from am. He's also exalted and uplifted higher than the am. So underiber, bring the reis to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Loi beide malos. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Loi, he personifies and he's bringing out both of these levels. First of all, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Loi is bringing out the idea of shleimus, the ultimate shleimus, the yichud and dvekus melikus. He's the ultimate level of dvekus with Hashem. Hecher von haben zu tamid zulas. He's higher than what he has to do with another person. He also has the ultimate hashpa on somebody else. That the second one, like we said, Shigdula, that he was appointed of Pari. So why does he bring Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi's name? Is because Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi personifies what Moshe Rabbeinu personified. On one hand, he had the level of Malchus, but the level of Malchus, the way it is in Atzilus, but also the way it has Ashpa. So that's like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, he had the ultimate level of perfection for himself. That's why he was born circumcised. On the other hand, he also was the ultimate level of being a shepherd, being a Ashpa. So he had both of these milas. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi, his name is mentioned in Rashi.